Marshal Wade Hollow grabbed Elena Ashford by the hair and dragged her into the center of Silver Ridge's main street like she weighed nothing. Like she was nothing. Her knees hit the frozen dirt. The crowd that had gathered, shopkeepers, ranchers, mothers holding children, didn't flinch. Some of them actually leaned forward. "Pick any woman you want," Wade announced to the line of rough-handed strangers he'd assembled. "This one's already been judged." Elena didn't scream. She'd learned that screaming only amused him. Her wrists were raw from the rope. Her lip had been split open since Tuesday. And the man she'd once trusted to uphold the law in this territory was now auctioning her dignity to whoever would take it. If you were standing in that crowd right now, would you look away? Or would you be the one who finally stepped forward? Before we go any further, if stories like this move you, if you believe that one act of courage can change everything, please subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss what comes next. And drop a comment below telling me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's go back to the moment everything changed. The morning they tied Elena Ashford to the post outside the Silver Ridge courthouse. The temperature hadn't climbed above freezing since before dawn. She could feel that much. The cold. Everything else had gone somewhat distant by then, the way pain does when it's been your constant companion long enough that your body starts treating it like weather. Just something you endure. Just something you move through. What she couldn't stop feeling was the rope. It wasn't the thick, rough kind used on cattle. Someone had chosen a thinner cord, the kind that cuts rather than restrains, and whoever had tied it knew exactly what they were doing. Every small movement tightened it. Standing still was the only mercy, and even that wasn't much of one. There were maybe 60 people gathered in the street. Could have been more. Elena had stopped counting faces somewhere around the 40th person. What she noticed instead was how ordinary they all looked. The blacksmith's wife in her good Sunday coat, the school teacher who had once complimented Elena's handwriting, 3 children who should have been inside somewhere warm, pressed against a fence post and staring with the wide-open eyes that children use when they sense something adult and terrible is happening. Marshal Wade Hollow stood at the edge of the raised platform, thumbs hooked into his belt, looking like a man who had just been handed exactly the morning he'd wanted. He wasn't a large man. That was the thing people always got wrong about Wade Hollow. They expected a bully to be big, but Wade was average height, average build, with a face that could pass for honest from 20 feet away. It was only up close that you noticed his eyes never quite matched whatever expression he was performing with his mouth. "Silver Ridge has been patient," he told the crowd, and he had the voice for it, low, steady, the kind that carries without shouting. "We gave this woman fair consideration. We gave her time to speak her case. And what did we find?" He paused. He was good at pauses. "We found a woman who poisoned her husband in his own bed, who has refused to show one moment of remorse, who has, in fact," he almost smiled, "accused this office of wrongdoing." A murmur moved through the crowd. Not quite anger. Something more uncomfortable than that. The sound people make when they've already decided something and don't want to be asked to reconsider it. Elena kept her eyes forward. There was a water trough across the street with a thin skin of ice across the top. She fixed her gaze on it, counted the cracks in the ice. Something to hold on to. "She's been a burden on this town's resources long enough," Wade continued. "Any man here who'll take her off our hands, give her work, keep her out of trouble, is doing Silver Ridge a service." The silence that followed lasted maybe 3 seconds. To Elena, it felt considerably longer. She had known this was coming. Wade had told her as much, in the particular way he had of explaining things, quietly, without raising his voice, so that the threat landed clean with no emotion to soften it. "You're going to stand out there, and you're going to let the town see what happens to women who make accusations they can't prove." That had been 4 days ago. She'd spent those 4 days trying to find some angle, some argument, some way out of this moment. There wasn't one. The first man who stepped forward was old enough to be her grandfather, and looked at her the way he might look at a horse he wasn't sure was worth the feed. He walked a slow circle around her, said nothing, and stepped back. The second man didn't even approach. He just called out from where he was standing, something crude enough that 2 women near the back of the crowd turned away. Wade said nothing to stop him. Elena's jaw tightened. That was the only external thing she let herself do, clench her jaw until her back teeth ached. Because if she unclenched it, she might say something. And if she said something right now, in front of all these people, in this particular moment with her hands tied and nowhere to go, she didn't know what she would say. That was the honest truth. She didn't know if it would be defiance or pleading, and she was not going to find out in public with Wade Hollow watching. A third man stepped forward, younger than the first two. He had the look of someone who worked hard and drank harder, and the way he was studying her made Elena's skin pull tight in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. She breathed in, breathed out, counted the cracks in the ice. Then she heard it, not loud. In fact, it was almost quiet enough to miss entirely, which was maybe why it cut through everything else so cleanly. Two small voices, coming from somewhere to her left. And the word they said wasn't her name. She had no reason to expect them to know her name, but it landed in her chest like a stone dropping into still water. Papa. And then, with the particular urgency of a child who has just seen something they cannot believe is real. Papa, that's her. That's the woman. Elena turned her head. She couldn't help it. The restraints didn't stop her from turning her head. There were two girls standing at the edge of the crowd, pressed close together in the way that twins do, not touching, but aligned, as if they shared some invisible center of gravity. They looked about 8 years old. Dark coats, dark braids, faces so pale they looked like they'd been standing in cold air since before the gathering started, which, Elena realized, they probably had. They were both staring at her. Not with the vague curiosity the other children in the crowd had shown, with recognition. The kind of recognition that Elena couldn't account for, because she had never seen these children before in her life. Standing just behind them, with one hand resting on each girl's shoulder as if he'd been trying to hold them in place and had just lost that particular battle, was a man Elena also did not recognize. He was tall, not in a way that announced itself, but in the practical way of someone who had spent years working land. A lean, used kind of height, like a fence post that had weathered a few seasons and was still standing. His hat was off, held at his side, and his face was not handsome exactly. Or maybe it was handsome in the way working things sometimes are, where the form serves the function so completely that beauty becomes incidental. I was looking at his daughters with an expression Elena recognized even from this distance. The expression of a father who has just heard his children say something that doesn't make sense and is trying very hard to understand it before reacting. "Girls," he said quietly, "what are you?" "She saved us, Papa." The bolder of the two, the one on the left, who stood with her chin slightly raised, said it again, more certain this time. "In the blizzard, 2 winters ago, she was the one." The man, the father, went very still. Elena watched it happen, watched some kind of internal calculation occur behind his eyes. Not disbelief exactly. Something more careful than that. The expression of a person who has been told something impossible before by these same 2 children and had made a choice about whether to believe it, and was now being required to revisit that choice. His gaze moved from his daughters to Elena. Their eyes met. Elena looked away first. She didn't have anything to offer in that moment, no confirmation, no explanation. She barely remembered the blizzard herself, or rather, she remembered it in the fragmented way you remember things that happened when your body was shutting down from cold. Flashes, the sound of wind, a weight against her side. She remembered the blanket, her last one. She remembered making a choice that she had not thought of as courage at the time. It had simply been the only thing that made sense in that moment, the only thing she could live with doing, even if living turned out to be a short project. But she did not remember faces. She had not known whether the children she'd sheltered that night had survived. She had thought about it sometimes, in the quieter moments of the past 2 years. She had hoped. She had not known. "That's enough," Wade's voice cut across the square. He'd been watching the disturbance at the edge of the crowd with the focused attention of a man who has learned to read when his carefully arranged situations are going sideways. "We've got business to finish here." The man in the crowd didn't move. "Sir," Wade said, with a particular edge of patience that wasn't patience at all, "if you're interested in the arrangement, step forward. Otherwise, what arrangement?" It wasn't a question. The tall man said it flatly, like a statement, like he was establishing something. "This woman has been adjudicated by this office as a danger to the community. We're placing her in responsible custody to— You're selling her." The square got quiet again. Different kind of quiet this time. Wade's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes shifted. I'd choose my next words carefully if I were you, friend. I don't know you. Rowan Mercer. The man didn't say it like an introduction. He said it like he was noting something into a ledger. I've got the Double Creek Ranch out past the Eastern Ridge, and I know what I'm looking at. He looked at Elena. Then he looked back at the marshal. I'll take her. The collective intake of breath from 60 people was almost audible. Elena's own reaction was less controlled than she would have liked. She felt something crack open in her chest before she could stop it. Not hope. She was too careful for hope. But the near cousin of it, the dangerous neighbor. She pressed it down hard. Wade Hollow looked at Rowan Mercer for a long moment with those eyes that didn't match his face. You understand what you're taking on. I understand plenty. Rowan crossed the space between them with the unhurried stride of a man who had made his decision somewhere back in the last 30 seconds and had no interest in walking it back now. I've got 2 daughters who need looking after, and you've got a woman who apparently kept those daughters alive when no one else was around to do it. That is not a verified account of events, Wade said, and there was something new in his voice, a careful flatness. Children imagine things. One of the twins made a small sound. Not words, just a breath of air that managed, somehow, to convey complete offense. Cut her loose, Rowan said. Mr. Mercer, cut her loose. The words were the same volume, not louder, but something in them had gone harder. Unless you're telling me this arrangement isn't what you said it was. Unless you're telling me you've got some other use for her that doesn't involve a responsible member of this community taking her in. Wade held Rowan's gaze for long enough to make a point of it. Then he nodded at one of his deputies. The rope came off Elena's wrists. She didn't make a sound when it did, even though removing it was worse than wearing it had been. She had learned that too. The moment of release was always the cruelest part, because the blood coming back felt like fire. She stood straight. She was not going to let this town see her anything other than upright. The deputy who'd cut her loose stepped back. Elena turned slowly to face the man who had just intervened in her life without being asked, without explanation, apparently on the word of 2 8-year-olds, and she looked at him with the clearest, most direct look she could manage. I didn't do it, she said. She didn't say what it was. He would know. Rowan Mercer looked at her, not up and down, the way the other men had, but directly, the way you look at someone you're actually seeing. I know, he said. The simplicity of it hit her somewhere she wasn't expecting. She turned before he could see her face do whatever her face was doing. The twins fell into step on either side of her without being asked. The bolder one, the one with her chin up, took Elena's right hand. Her fingers were small and cold and entirely certain. Elena looked down at her. My name is Clara, the girl said. This is my sister Maisie. We remembered you every single day. Maisie, quiet, with darker circles under her eyes, reached up and touched Elena's sleeve with 2 fingers. Just that. Elena breathed in slowly through her nose. She had not known whether they'd survived. She had not known, and here they were, walking beside her in the mud of Silver Ridge's main street, and the woman who had spent 6 months being told she was no one, that she mattered to no one, that no one would miss her. She breathed out. I didn't know your names, she said, which was all she could manage right then. That's okay, Clara said seriously. We knew you. Behind them, Elena could hear Wade Hollow saying something with the word temporary in it, and the word jurisdiction, and the phrase we'll be speaking again, but it was receding, getting smaller, the way things do when you're walking away from them. Rowan Mercer's wagon was hitched at the end of the block. He helped the girls up without comment, then turned to help Elena and stopped when she climbed up herself without waiting. He took note of that. She could see him take note of it, but he didn't say anything. He climbed up on the other side, gathered the reins, and they moved out of Silver Ridge without another word. For the first 10 minutes, no one spoke. The town fell away behind them. The road east opened up across flat winter grassland, the kind of country that had no opinions about you, that would shelter you or kill you with equal indifference. Elena was familiar with that kind of country. She had grown up in it. Right now it was a relief. You don't know me, she said finally. No, Rowan agreed. You don't know if any of what those women said, what your daughter said, is true. No, he said again. A pause. Doesn't it bother you? She asked. Not challenging, genuinely asking. Rowan thought about it for a moment. She was already understanding, a man who actually thought about things before answering, which was rarer than it should have been. "They've never lied to me," he said simply. "Not once. About anything." He looked out across the flat country. "Their mother died in that storm. The night they're describing. I rode out looking for them for 8 hours before the search party found them. When I got there, they were alive. Barely, but alive. They were wrapped in a blanket that didn't belong to us, and there was no one else around." He stopped. "I told myself someone had passed through and left it. A trapper, a traveler, somebody." A pause. "Clara told me a dark-haired woman had stayed with them through the worst of it, that she'd given them everything she had." He glanced at Elena's hair, dark brown, nearly black. "I told her she'd imagined it, or dreamed it, because I needed that to be true." "Why?" Elena asked. Rowan was quiet for a moment. "Because if it was true," he said quietly, "then somewhere out there was a woman who had saved my daughter's lives, and I hadn't found her. Hadn't thanked her. Hadn't even tried." The wagon rolled on. Maisie had fallen asleep against Clara's shoulder. Clara was watching Elena with the patient, ancient attention that some children have, the ones who've been through something and come out the other side older than their years. "Are you going to run away?" Clara asked. "Clara," Rowan started. "It's all right," Elena said. She looked at the girl. "No, I'm not going to run away." "Good." Clara nodded, satisfied. "Because I've been waiting 2 years to say thank you." Elena opened her mouth, closed it. "You're welcome," she finally managed. It came out rougher than she intended. Her voice did something at the end of it that she would never, under any other circumstances, have allowed it to do in front of strangers. Rowan kept his eyes on the road. She was grateful for that. The Double Creek Ranch appeared on the horizon as the afternoon light started to thin. Not grand. A working ranch, honest and functional, with a main house, a barn, outbuildings, and the particular settled look of land that had been used and tended and argued with and ultimately respected. Fence lines running straight. A kitchen garden, winter bare, but clearly established. Elena studied it as they got closer. She had no idea what came next. She had been in survival mode long enough that the concept of next had gotten abstract and distant. The next hour. That was as far as she could think. She was free of the rope. She was in a wagon instead of a cell. 2 small girls were pressed against her on either side, sharing their warmth with the automatic generosity of children who haven't yet learned to calculate what they give. And somewhere back in Silver Ridge, Marshal Wade Hollow was watching this wagon disappear into the eastern distance. Elena knew, with a certainty that settled in her stomach like cold iron, that he was not finished with her. He had worked too hard to build this particular story. Spent too much effort making sure she stayed silent, stayed ruined, stayed gone. A rancher's charity was an inconvenience. A challenge. Something to be corrected. She looked at Rowan Mercer's profile, the set of his jaw, the careful way he held the reins, and felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Not safety. She was too practical for that. But the possibility of an ally. She turned back to the road. The ranch grew larger. The first crack in everything that Wade Hollow had built opened a little wider. And in Silver Ridge, behind them, the marshal stood in the empty square long after the wagon was out of sight, and watched the eastern road with the particular stillness of a man who was already planning his next move. The first night at Double Creek Ranch, Elena didn't sleep. That wasn't unusual. She hadn't slept properly in 6 months, not since the night they'd come for her, 3 deputies and a warrant. That looked legitimate until you read the language closely enough to notice it had been written for someone who'd already been decided about. Sleep had become something she did in pieces, shallow and watchful, her body refusing to fully let go even when her mind was exhausted past functioning. But this was different from the jail's particular sleeplessness. This was a clean bed in a small room off the kitchen. Rowan had given it to her without ceremony, just opened the door and said there were blankets in the chest and water in the pitcher. And the problem wasn't discomfort. The problem was that comfort had become unfamiliar enough to feel suspicious. She lay on her back and stared at the ceiling and listened to the ranch settle around her. Houses have sounds. This one had good ones. The solid knock of the wood contracting in the cold. Wind working its way around the north corner of the roof. Somewhere above her, one of the girls turning over in her sleep and the creak of a bed frame answering. And underneath all of it, steady and low, the particular quiet of a place that had been lived in long enough to know what it was. Elena pressed the back of her hand against her wrist where the rope had been. The skin was still raw. She'd washed it before bed. Clara had insisted on that, producing a tin of salve from somewhere, with the focused competence of a child who has learned to take care of things because sometimes adults are too busy being broken to do it themselves. Elena had let her. She hadn't known how to refuse without making Clara feel the refusal, and the last thing she wanted to do was make those girls feel anything other than certain that she was glad to be here. She was glad to be here. That was the thing she kept circling back to because it felt dangerous. Gladness was a thing that could be taken away. She had been glad before. Glad in her marriage, in her home, in the small, ordinary life she'd been building with Thomas, before Thomas had started coming home late and distracted and increasingly afraid of something he wouldn't name. She had been glad, and then one morning he was dead, and Wade Hollow was at her door with a warrant, and the gladness had become evidence of something. She didn't know yet what she was to Rowan Mercer. She didn't know what she was supposed to be. She fell asleep sometime before dawn, finally, with her hand still pressed against her wrist. She woke up to the smell of coffee and the sound of an argument. Not a serious one. She understood that within the first few seconds of lying there listening to it, the particular register of disagreement between people who are actually comfortable with each other, the kind of argument that has texture and even some amusement underneath the surface friction. "I already put the butter in," Clara was saying. "That doesn't mean you did it right," Maisie replied, which was interesting because Maisie had seemed like the quieter twin. Apparently quiet didn't mean conflict-averse. "I've been making biscuits since before you could reach the counter." "You've been burning biscuits since before I could reach the counter. There's a difference." Elena got up. She found her boots. Someone had cleaned the mud off them, which she suspected was Clara's doing, and put on the same clothes she'd been wearing yesterday because they were the only clothes she had, and walked out into the kitchen. The kitchen was the biggest room in the house. It had the used look of a space where actual life occurred. A table with mismatched chairs, a windowsill crowded with things, a hook by the back door holding 4 different coats in 4 different states of repair. The stove was large and clearly the center of the room's gravity. Both girls were standing at the counter, and the issue of the biscuits appeared to be ongoing. They both turned when Elena came in. "She put too much butter," Maisie said immediately. "It needed it," Clara said. "The dough was dry." "How do you know the dough was dry?" "Because I touched it." Elena looked at the bowl between them. She had, in fact, cooked before. She'd cooked for years, for herself and for Thomas, in a kitchen not entirely unlike this one. She looked at the dough. "The dough's fine," she said, "but your heat's too high. If you bake biscuits at that temperature, you'll burn the bottom before the center sets." Silence. Both girls looked at her. Then Clara pulled the lever on the stove with the expression of someone who has just received information that vindicates them in a related matter, even if not in the specific argument at hand. "See?" she said to Maisie. "Temperature." "She didn't say you were right," Maisie pointed out. "She didn't say I was wrong." Elena went to the coffee pot. She found a cup without asking where the cups were kept, because the cups were on the shelf above the pot, and kitchens in working houses were generally logical places if you let them show you their own logic. She poured coffee and stood at the window and looked out at the ranch in early morning light. Rowan was already in the yard. She could see him moving between the barn and the fence line along the east pasture, checking something with the focused stride of a man running through a mental list. He hadn't seen her yet. She watched him for a moment. Then she turned back to the girls and the biscuit situation, because standing at windows watching men who'd done her a kindness was not something she was going to make a habit of. "Show me what you've got," she said. Breakfast happened. It was not graceful. Maisie dropped a fork, and Clara overcompensated on the salt, and Elena burned her fingers on the pan handle because she forgot she wasn't in her own kitchen where that handle ran cool. But the biscuits came out right, and Rowan came in from the yard and ate 2 of them standing at the counter before he even sat down, which Elena took as a reasonable indicator of genuine hunger rather than politeness. "They're better than usual," he said to no one in particular. "Elena fixed the temperature," Clara said. Rowan looked at Elena. "You cook?" "I do a lot of things," she said, which came out flatter than she intended, but he didn't seem bothered by it. "She also fixed Maisie's braid this morning," Clara offered. "I didn't ask her to," Maisie said, but she reached up and touched the braid in question, which was neater than whatever she'd had before, and didn't look entirely displeased. "I have quick hands," Elena said. That was just true. Thomas used to joke that she could have been a card dealer. She didn't mention Thomas. She finished her coffee. The morning sorted itself into tasks, the way mornings on working ranches always did, not by plan so much as by necessity, one thing leading to the next in the practical chain of everything that needed doing. Elena found herself drawn into it almost without deciding to be. The girls had school lessons in the front room after breakfast, conducted from a reader that Clara managed with ease and Maisie managed with gritted teeth determination, and Elena sat at the table mending a shirt she'd found in the basket by the window, because her hands needed something, and the shirt had a collar that had been poorly repaired, and she couldn't look at a poor repair and leave it. Rowan came in around mid-morning. He pulled a chair to the other side of the table and laid out what looked like account books, and sat there working through numbers with the expression of a man who had made his peace with arithmetic without ever fully liking it. They didn't talk for almost an hour, which was, Elena realized, more comfortable than it had any right to be. "Can I ask you something?" she said finally. He looked up. "Go ahead." "Wade Hollow. How long has he been marshal here?" Something shifted in Rowan's expression. Not quite guardedness. He'd been somewhat guarded since they met, which she respected because unguarded people were usually either naive or performing. This was more like attention sharpening. 8 years, give or take, he said. Came in after the last marshal died. Influenza. And before that? I don't know his full history. Why? Elena set down the shirt. Because he's not a corrupt man who got lazy, she said. He's a careful man who's been doing this a long time. There's a difference. Rowan closed his account book. You think he's connected to something bigger? It wasn't a question. He'd gotten there without her having to walk him through it, which told her something about the quality of his attention. My husband was an attorney, Elena said. It was the first time she'd mentioned Thomas directly, and she felt the familiar tightening in her chest that came with it. Not grief exactly, not anymore, but the scar tissue where grief had been. He started taking on cases about 2 years before he died. Land disputes mostly. Small ranchers who said their titles had been challenged or their contracts had been altered. He told me it was complicated. He told me not to worry. But you worried. I'm not built to not worry, she said simply. And he was coming home later and losing weight, and one night I woke up and found him sitting in the kitchen at 3 a.m, burning papers in the stove. And when I asked him what they were, he said, she stopped, swallowed. He said they were old files, things that didn't matter anymore. Rowan was very still. 3 weeks later he was dead, Elena said, and Wade Hollow had a warrant in my face before Thomas had been cold for 12 hours. The kitchen was quiet for a moment. That's fast, Rowan said. Yes, Elena said. It is. She picked the shirt back up, not because she was done talking, but because her hands needed the occupation. The land disputes, Rowan said slowly. What ranches? He didn't tell me names, but I remember he mentioned the Western Ridge and something about water rights along the Callaway Creek Basin. Rowan went very still in the particular way that meant something had landed. What? Elena said. 3 ranches along that basin changed hands in the last 4 years, he said. Families I knew. The Pattersons, the Reyes family, old John Clure. All of them said the same thing, that they'd received notices claiming their titles were defective. All of them ended up selling for less than the land was worth to a land company out of... He stopped. To a company called Granger Holdings, Elena said quietly. Rowan looked at her. Thomas had that name in one of his files, she said. I saw it once. He closed the file when he noticed I'd seen it. She paused. He was protecting me. Silas Granger, Rowan said. The name came out with a weight to it that suggested history. He operates out of a land office in the county seat, makes legal, on paper, calls himself a land developer. He said developer with the particular tone of someone reading a word in a language they find dishonest. He's the reason Thomas is dead, Elena said. She said it clearly, without decoration, because she'd had 6 months in a cell to make her peace with saying it out loud, and she didn't need to soften it. Rowan was quiet for a long moment. From the front room, Maisie could be heard sounding out a word with considerable effort. You have to understand something, Rowan said finally. Granger has the county commissioner in his pocket, the circuit judge, and apparently the marshal. He looked at her steadily. What you're describing isn't just a corrupt official. You're describing a system. I know, Elena said. Which means, I know. She met his eyes. Which is why I need to know if you understand what you brought home with you yesterday. Because if you don't, if this is about gratitude for the blizzard and you want to settle a debt and be done, I can be gone by morning and you won't hear from me again. She meant it. She had meant it when she said it in her head at 3 in the morning, and she meant it now, saying it to his face. But if you're going to help me, if you're actually going to stand next to this, then I need you to know exactly what it is. Rowan held her gaze. Then he opened his account book again. The Patterson Ranch was my neighbor, he said. Tom Patterson shook my hand at my wife's funeral. His family lived on that land for 40 years. A pause. He wrote something in the ledger with a deliberate hand. I know what this is. Elena looked at him for a moment. Then she looked back down at the shirt collar and went back to work. Outside, the winter morning continued without sentiment. A hawk crossed the gray sky above the east pasture. One of the horses in the barn knocked against a stall board twice and then went quiet. The world proceeded at its own indifferent pace, but something had been decided in that kitchen, without ceremony, between two practical people who had both lost things they couldn't get back. The trouble arrived on a Thursday. Elena had been at the ranch 11 days. She knew it was 11 because she'd been counting, not out of impatience, but out of the habit of marking time that you develop when time has been used against you, when the space between days matters. 11 days of mornings in that kitchen, and afternoons where she'd gradually, without discussion, taken on the domestic work that had been managed incompletely before her arrival, not because anyone asked, but because she was there and she was capable and doing nothing, made her feel like she was waiting for something, and waiting made her think too much. 11 days. Clara had started telling her things, the particular intimacy of a child who has decided you're trustworthy and proceeds to download her entire interior life without warning. Maisie was slower. Maisie watched. But on the 9th day, Maisie had come and sat next to her while she was braiding Clara's hair and said, very quietly, "Will you do mine too?" And that had been its own kind of thing. Rowan and she had talked more. Carefully. The way two people talk when they're each trying to understand the shape of the other without prying. She'd learned that his wife had been Margaret, that Margaret had been funny and sharp and bad at directions, that he still sometimes talked about her in present tense and caught himself and fell quiet. He'd learned that Elena had grown up east of here, that she could read surveying maps because her father had been a surveyor, that she'd been married to Thomas for 4 years and had been, mostly, happy. Mostly was a word she'd chosen precisely, and he'd heard the precision. On the 11th day, 2 horses came up the road from the west. Elena saw them from the kitchen window before anyone else did. She recognized Wade Hollow's horse, a gray with a white blaze, distinctive, and the deputy beside him was someone she knew only as Cutter, a wide-shouldered man who'd been present at several of her more unpleasant encounters with the marshal's office. She set down the pan she was holding. "Rowan," she called. The way she said it communicated something because he came from the back room without asking why and looked out the window and his jaw set. "Girls," he said, appearing at the kitchen doorway, "go upstairs." Clara opened her mouth. "Now," he said. Not loud, just final. They went. Elena heard their feet on the stairs, and then the particular silence of children who are absolutely listening from the top of the staircase. Wade Hollow knocked. He didn't wait to be let in. That was his move. Knock to announce, then open the door before you could respond, because the moment you opened a door, you'd already seeded something. Elena had noticed this the first time he'd come to her house, after Thomas died. She'd noticed all of his moves by now. He stepped into the kitchen and looked around with the slow proprietary attention of a man who wanted you to know he was assessing your space. "Miss Ashford," he said, "good to see you're settled." "Marshall," Elena said. He looked at Rowan. "Mr. Mercer, appreciate you taking on the arrangement." His tone was amiable. His eyes weren't. "I've come to do a brief welfare check, as is standard in these kinds of agreements." "Standard," Rowan said. "Absolutely. We want to make sure—" "There's no agreement," Rowan said. "I didn't sign anything. There's no arrangement on record anywhere. You stood in the street and offered a free woman to strangers, and I objected, and I brought her home. That's the sum of it." Wade's amiable expression held for a moment with the effortful quality of something being maintained. "I understand your perspective," he said, "but Miss Ashford remains under the jurisdiction of—" Under the jurisdiction of a process that you ran without a judge present, without a jury, without any formal charge filed in the past 6 months that I can find in the county record. Rowan's voice was level. This was, Elena was beginning to understand, one of the genuinely frightening things about him, the evenness. He didn't escalate. He just stated things. I've had occasion to look into the paperwork, Marshal. There isn't much. Something moved in Wade's eyes. Are you a lawyer, Mr. Mercer? No, but I have a cousin who is. He's been riding down from Millhaven once a week since last Friday. That was news to Elena. She kept her face still. Wade looked at her then, and she held his gaze with the same deliberate steadiness she had been practicing since the post in the town square, because she understood that the moment she looked away was the moment she gave him something. Miss Ashford, he said quietly, I'd like a word. Alone. No, Rowan said. Mr. Mercer? No. The word was not negotiable. Elena heard that, and she suspected Wade heard it too. The marshal was quiet for a moment. Then he said pleasantly, There are still matters outstanding from the investigation. Miss Ashford made some public accusations that need to be addressed about the integrity of this office. He paused. Accusations like that carry their own consequences. She can make any accusation she wants, Rowan said. That's not against the law. What you did to her wrists with that rope might be. Something flickered in Wade's expression, fast and then gone. I'll be back, he said, with the smile of a man explaining something simple to someone slow. With proper documentation, at which point we'll be handling this through proper channels. He looked around the kitchen one more time, at the girls' coats on the hooks, at the pan Elena had been holding, at the account books on the table, with the slow survey of a man making a map. Then he left. Cutter, who hadn't said a word the entire time, gave Elena a look on the way out that she filed away without reacting to. The door closed. The kitchen was very quiet. From the top of the stairs, Clara said, Is he gone? He's gone, Rowan said. A pause. He's a bad man, Clara said, with the directness of children who don't have to be polite about what they can see clearly. Yes, Rowan said. He didn't tell her she was wrong. That night, after the girls were in bed, Elena and Rowan sat at the kitchen table with 2 cups of coffee going cold between them and laid out what they knew. She talked. He listened. Then he talked, and she listened. They kept their voices low without discussing why, because some conversations have their own correct register. She told him everything she knew about Thomas's case files, what she'd seen before he started hiding things from her, what she'd overheard, what she'd pieced together in the months since, the land titles, the altered contracts, the families who'd been pressured out, the connection to Granger Holdings, which appeared in county real estate records as the buyer in every one of those forced sales. He told her what he knew from his side, that Silas Granger had been moving through this territory for nearly a decade, acquiring land along creek basins and ridge lines that looked like random purchases until you overlaid them on a map and noticed they were assembling something, a continuous corridor of property that would give one man control of the primary water access across 3 counties. Water rights in a territory like this, Elena said. Worth more than gold, Rowan said. Long term. Whoever controls the water controls who survives on the land. He paused. Thomas figured it out. And Wade Hollow made sure no one else would. For however long Granger needed, which was just about long enough. He looked at his coffee. There's a land commission meeting scheduled in the county seat in 6 weeks. They're going to ratify a series of property transfers. After that, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. What would stop it? Elena said. Evidence? Rowan said. The kind that's documented, financial records, original title transfers, proof of how those transfers were forced. He looked at her. Did Thomas have files? Somewhere other than the house? He had an office, Elena said. On the main street in Silver Ridge. I don't know if Wade's people cleaned it out. She paused. But Thomas also had... She stopped. Rowan waited. He had a brother, she said. Nathaniel. He's a newspaper reporter, works out of Millhaven. Thomas used to send him copies of things, for safekeeping. She looked at Rowan. Thomas didn't trust the mail for anything important. He'd have sent it in person or had someone hand carry it, which means if he got word to Nathaniel before he died, Nathaniel might have everything. They looked at each other across the kitchen table. The coffee was cold by now. Neither of them was going to drink it. Outside, the wind was picking up, the kind of wind that came before a change in weather, that moved through the grass with a sound almost like breathing. "You need to find your brother-in-law," Rowan said. "I haven't seen Nathaniel in 2 years," Elena said. "He might not know I'm out of that cell. He might not even know—" She stopped. He and Thomas were close. He's going to want to know what happened. He's going to want to— She paused again. "He's not a careful man. He's a good man, but he's not careful." "A reporter," Rowan said. "He believes in the story," Elena said. "That's what he calls it, the story. Like it's a living thing that has to come out." She said it with the combination of affection and exasperation that only family members can fully produce. "He's going to want to print it." "Maybe that's exactly what needs to happen," Rowan said. "Maybe," Elena said. "Or maybe it gets him killed before we have anything that can protect him." Rowan was quiet for a moment. "I'll get a message to him," he said. "Carefully, through my cousin. Give him enough to know you're safe and that we need to meet." He paused. "But Elena," it was the first time he'd used her given name. She noticed it and noted it and kept her expression even. "I need to know that if this goes where I think it might go, if we take this as far as it needs to go, you understand what we're walking into." "I've been living in it for 6 months," she said. "You're the one who's new." He almost smiled. It came and went quickly, the way things did with him. There, then back behind whatever he kept things behind. "Fair point," he said. She gathered up the coffee cups. "Your cousin," she said. "The lawyer. What's he actually able to do?" "Right now, mostly identify how legal the process against you wasn't, which gives us something to work with." He paused. "If Nathaniel has what you think he might have, real documentation, we can build something that's harder to ignore." "Or easier to make disappear," Elena said. "That too." She stood at the sink and looked out at the dark yard. Somewhere out there, past the fence line and the eastern ridge and the 30 miles of winter grassland between here and Silver Ridge, Wade Hollow was in his office, or his house, or whatever comfortable space a man like that retreated to, and he was thinking about today. About the kitchen he'd stood in and assessed. About Rowan Mercer and his account books, and his inconvenient lawyer cousin. About Elena, who would not stay destroyed. She didn't know yet what Wade would do next. She knew he would do something. What she didn't know, what kept her standing at the sink long after the cups were clean, looking out at a darkness that told her nothing, was whether she would be ready when he did. Behind her, Rowan closed the account book and pushed back his chair. "Get some sleep," he said. Not unkind, just practical. "I'll try," she said, which was, for both of them, about as honest as it got. She went to her room. She lay down. She pressed her wrist against the sheet and felt the skin that was slowly, imperceptibly, beginning to heal. She did not sleep for a long time, but when she finally did, it was the deepest sleep she'd had since before everything fell apart. And when she woke before dawn to the sound of wind against the window, she lay still for a moment in the unfamiliar comfort of the clean bed and thought about Nathaniel and about evidence and about the Land Commission meeting 6 weeks away and about what a man like Silas Granger would do when he realized someone was coming for him. Nathaniel Ashford arrived on a Tuesday, 3 weeks after Rowan sent the message through his cousin, and he arrived the way he did everything. Too fast, not enough planning, with more energy than the situation called for, and a leather satchel over his shoulder that looked like it had been through a war. Elena heard the horse before she saw him, and she was already at the door when he came around the bend in the road. And for a moment she just stood there on the porch steps, watching him ride toward her with the particular complicated feeling of seeing family after a long absence that has involved significant suffering on both sides. Nathaniel was 34, 2 years older than her, with Thomas's same dark coloring and none of Thomas's careful temperament. He saw her and pulled up too fast and was off the horse before it had fully stopped moving. He crossed the yard in 6 strides and grabbed her by both shoulders and held her at arm's length and looked at her face with the expression of a man doing damage assessment. "You're thinner," he said. "You're late," she said. He pulled her into a hug that was slightly too hard and lasted slightly too long, and she let it, because some things you let family do even when you're not naturally inclined toward being held. 3 weeks, she said into his shoulder. "I know. I had to be careful. Wade's people have been watching the road out of Mill Haven." He pulled back and looked at her again. "Are you all right?" "Define all right." "Elena." "I'm functional," she said. "I'm angry. I'm working on something. That's about as all right as I expect to be for a while. He nodded. That was the thing about Nathaniel. He didn't need you to perform recovery for him. He could take the truth straight and work with it. Rowan came out from the barn then, wiping his hands on a cloth, and Nathaniel turned to look at him with the measuring attention of a brother who has something to be protective about. You're Mercer, Nathaniel said. I am, Rowan said. A pause. Nathaniel looked at him the way journalists look at people. Not unkindly, but with the thoroughness of someone accustomed to reading what people choose not to say. Thank you, Nathaniel said finally, for what you did in the square. Rowan nodded once. Come inside. They sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Elena and Rowan had talked over cold coffee 3 weeks ago, and Nathaniel opened his satchel. He didn't unpack it immediately. He set it on the table and put both hands flat on the outside of it and looked at Elena. Thomas sent me things, he said. Over about 8 months. Not all at once. Pieces. He'd write out himself sometimes or send things with people he trusted. He never said why in the letters, just that he was working on something and that I should hold on to it. A pause. After he died, after I heard, I went to his office. The front room had been cleared out. Papers, files, everything. But Thomas had a back room that wasn't obvious if you didn't know about it. The storage room, Elena said, with the false shelf. Nathaniel looked at her. You knew about it. I found it once by accident and never mentioned it because he clearly didn't want me to know. She paused. He was protecting me. He thought not knowing would protect me. Her voice was even. She'd made her peace with that decision of Thomas's. Not without difficulty, not without grief, but she'd made it. Obviously it didn't. Obviously, Nathaniel said. He opened the satchel. What came out was not what Elena had expected, and she wasn't sure what she'd expected. Files, maybe. Papers. The kinds of documents a careful man would gather. There were those. But there was also something else. A small metal recording device of the kind that newspaper offices used for transcription. Compact, practical, the kind of thing you could hold in one hand. Nathaniel set it on the table between them. He made a record, he said, audio, voice, before he died. He looked at Elena and his voice changed register slightly, the way voices do when they're delivering something that the person speaking has been holding for a long time. He knew he was in danger. He didn't know when or how, but he knew it was coming, and he wanted there to be something that couldn't be denied. The kitchen's very quiet. I haven't played it for anyone, Nathaniel said. I needed to find you first. Elena looked at the device. It was unremarkable. Dull metal. A small crank mechanism on the side for playback. The most ordinary-looking thing she had ever seen, and it contained her husband's voice. She breathed in. Play it, she said. Elena, play it, Nathaniel. He worked the mechanism. There was a brief mechanical sound, a hiss, and then Thomas's voice. Elena's hand went flat on the table. She didn't move it. She just pressed it there, palm down, like she needed something solid under her. His voice was different from how she remembered it. Or not different, it was exactly right, every cadence, the way he dropped the end of sentences when he was being precise about something. But 6 months of not hearing it had made the reality of it hit differently than memory did. Memory softens things. Memory smooths the edges. The recording gave her the edges back. He spoke clearly, methodically, the way he always organized his thoughts when something mattered. He stated his name, the date, his professional capacity. Then he began. He described Silas Granger's operation from the beginning, how it had started as legitimate land speculation, how it had shifted into something systematic, how Granger had identified the water corridor and begun acquiring parcels through a combination of genuine purchase and manufactured legal pressure. He named ranchers who had been targeted, described the specific methods used to challenge their titles, altered county records, forged transfer documents, clerks who had been bribed or threatened. He described Wade Hollow's role, not just cover, but active participation. Wade had provided the legal veneer. Wade had made the threatening visits. Wade had made sure that anyone who complained to the appropriate authorities found those authorities either uninterested or absent. He described 3 deaths that had been ruled accidents over the past 4 years. He stated plainly that he did not believe they were accidents. And then, near the end, Thomas said something that made Nathaniel reach over and cover Elena's hand with his. Elena knows nothing about this investigation. She has never known. I have kept her deliberately apart from all of it, because if something happens to me, I need whoever hears this to understand that she is not a threat to anyone. She is not a participant. She is my wife, and she is innocent. And if she is ever accused of anything related to my death, that accusation is a lie constructed by the same men who are named in this record. The mechanism hissed. The room was silent. Rowan, who had been sitting very still across the table, let out a breath. Elena did not cry. That wasn't a decision she made. It was just the reality of where she was, which was somewhere past the acute stage of grief and into the harder country beyond it, where the sadness doesn't go away, but it stops being something that arrives in waves and becomes instead something you carry. She had cried plenty. In the cell, in the dark, when the nights went long enough that she stopped caring about who heard. She had used up that particular resource. What she felt now was something more functional, a kind of settling. He knew, she said. He knew, Nathaniel agreed. She looked at her brother-in-law. He had Thomas's eyes and a journalist's restless hands, and right now those hands were not restless. They were very still, which she recognized as his version of serious. What else did he send you? She said. Nathaniel spread the contents of the satchel across the table. It took 2 hours to go through all of it. Financial records showing the transfer of money between Granger Holdings and a series of accounts that eventually traced back to Wade Hollow's office operations. Original land title documents with alterations that would be visible to any competent examiner. Sworn written statements from 2 of the families who'd been forced out, the Pattersons and old John Clure, describing in specific detail the visits they'd received, the threats, the documents they'd been shown. A ledger page, apparently photographed and reproduced, showing payments to 3 county officials by name, and a copy of a letter, unsigned but in a handwriting that Thomas had annotated as Silas Granger's, discussing the disposal of a legal matter that had become inconvenient. The letter was dated 11 days before Thomas died. Rowan read everything methodically, in the order Elena handed it to him, without comment until he'd finished. Then he leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment. "This is enough," he said, "if it gets in front of the right people." "The right people are the problem," Nathaniel said. "The county commissioner." "Not the county," Rowan said. "We need the territorial court. There's a federal circuit judge who comes through twice a year, Judge Hartley, out of the Eastern District. He's got no connection to this county's politics. He doesn't owe Granger anything." He paused. "He's due through in 5 weeks." "The Land Commission meeting is in 6, Elena said. "Which means we have a window," Rowan said. "Small, but it exists." Nathaniel looked between them. "You've been planning this." "We've been thinking about it," Elena said. "There's a difference?" "Yes," she said. "We didn't have anything to plan with until today." Nathaniel ran a hand through his hair in the distracted, ruffling way he'd always done when he was processing something. "There's another problem," he said. "Getting this to Judge Hartley requires going through official channels in this county, and every official channel in this county appears to be compromised." "Not everyone," Rowan said. "There's a deputy, Owen Briggs, works out of the South office. He and Wade have been having disagreements for about a year. Quiet ones, but I've heard things." He paused. "He grew up out here. His father's land was on the Callaway Creek Basin." Elena and Nathaniel looked at him. "One of the ones Granger acquired?" Elena asked. 3 years ago. His father took a settlement that Owen told him not to take. They argued about it. The father took it anyway because he was old and tired and the pressure had been going on for 2 years and he just wanted it to stop." Rowan looked at the table. "Owen Briggs has been wearing Wade Hollow's badge ever since, and I imagine that sits on him in a particular way." "That's a theory," Nathaniel said. "It is," Rowan agreed. "Approaching the wrong person with this, I know. Gets us all killed, or at minimum gets this entire collection of evidence into Wade Hollow's hands before we've had a chance to—" "Nathaniel," Elena said. He stopped. "Rowan knows," she said quietly. "He's thought about this more carefully than you've had time to yet. Let him finish." A pause. Nathaniel looked at Rowan with a reassessment happening somewhere behind his eyes. "Sorry," he said. "No offense taken," Rowan said, with the equanimity of a man who understood that a protective brother-in-law arriving with information and adrenaline was going to have opinions. "Here's what I think we do. I talk to Owen Briggs alone first. No documents, nothing on paper, just a conversation. I've known him passing well for years. We've worked neighboring fence lines, bought cattle at the same auction house. If I read him wrong, the worst outcome is he tells Wade I spoke to him, and Wade already knows we're not his friends. He paused. But I don't think I'm reading him wrong. The afternoon light had gone long and thin by the time they finished talking. Clara and Maisie had come home from the neighbor's house where they'd spent the day, sized up the situation with the accuracy of children raised around adult tension, and quietly made themselves scarce in the front room with their reader. Elena could hear them through the wall, Clara reading aloud, Maisie correcting her pronunciation of words she probably knew perfectly well, but was correcting on principle. Nathaniel was going to stay. That was decided without much discussion. He'd brought enough to last a week, and leaving now with what he knew was both dangerous for him and wasteful for them. Elena showed him the small room off the back porch, which Rowan had been using for storage and cleared out now with the same wordless practicality he applied to most things. That night was different from the previous nights. The house felt fuller, and Fuller felt complicated. Elena lay in her room and listened to the sounds of 3 adults and 2 children under one roof, and thought about what Thomas had said on that recording, "She is my wife and she is innocent," and thought about the particular cruelty of being protected so completely that the protection becomes the weapon used against you. She did not blame Thomas. She had not permitted herself to blame Thomas, which was different from not wanting to, and she was honest enough with herself to know the difference. He had done what he thought was right. He had been wrong about whether it would work, but right about why he was doing it, and you could not hold a dead man responsible for being wrong about whether his love was sufficient armor. She fell asleep thinking about Owen Briggs, whom she'd never met, and about the 5-week window, and about whether a recording of a dead man's voice was enough to undo everything that had been done. It wasn't a comfortable thought to fall asleep to, but it was a real one, and real was what she had. Rowan rode to town 4 days later. He told Elena he was going for supplies, which was partly true. He came back with flour and lamp oil and a coil of fence wire. But he also came back with the particular expression of a man who has had a conversation that went better than he'd prepared for it to go and is still deciding how to feel about that. He waited until the girls were occupied and Nathaniel was in the back working through the documents for the 4th time, organizing them, building an order that would make sense to a judge who was seeing them fresh. And then he told Elena. Owen Briggs had listened to the whole thing without interrupting, had asked 2 questions at the end, had sat for a long moment in the south office with the door closed and then said, quietly, "My father's land was worth 4 times what he settled for." He was in. Elena sat with that for a moment. "What does in mean to him?" she said carefully. "It means he'll facilitate getting the documentation to Judge Hartley's clerk through the territorial mail system, which bypasses the county office. And it means..." Rowan paused. "It means he'll testify, if it comes to that. He's been keeping his own records for 2 years. Things he saw, things he was ordered to do and didn't fully do, discrepancies he noticed." Another pause. "He's got a written account of 3 occasions where Wade ordered him to destroy documents related to property disputes. He kept copies." Elena stared at him. "He kept copies." "He didn't know what he was going to do with them," Rowan said, "but he kept them. The way people keep things when something doesn't sit right, and they can't stop thinking about it even though they don't have a plan yet." Elena understood that better than she could express. The next 2 weeks were the closest thing to productive peace she had experienced since before Thomas died, and she distrusted it accordingly. Nathaniel worked on organizing the evidence. Owen Briggs, working carefully and quietly from inside the marshal's office, put together the package for Judge Hartley's clerk. Rowan's cousin made another visit and confirmed that the legal case for Elena's wrongful imprisonment was solid, that the process Wade had run was so procedurally hollow it barely qualified as a hearing, let alone a trial. Rowan managed the ranch. Elena managed the house, which she had stopped thinking of as someone else's house sometime in the 2nd week without noticing when the shift occurred. Clara was teaching her a card game that appeared to have rules that changed depending on how Clara was performing, and Maisie had taken to appearing next to Elena at random moments and asking questions with the focused intensity of a child who keeps a mental list of things she wants to understand. One evening, while Elena was mending again, she had worked through most of the mending basket by now, which was either a contribution or a nervous habit, depending on how you looked at it. Maisie came and sat cross-legged on the floor next to her chair. Do you miss your house? Maisie asked. Elena considered the question seriously, because Maisie asked questions seriously and deserved the same in return. Sometimes, she said, I miss some things that were in it. What things? A quilt my mother made, some books, She stopped. Thomas had a particular coffee cup he'd had since before I knew him, blue, with a chip in the handle. He refused to throw it away. She paused. I miss that cup. Which is strange because I used to tell him to get rid of it. Maisie was quiet for a moment. I miss my mother's voice, she said. I can still see her face, but I can't remember exactly what her voice sounded like anymore, and it bothers me. Elena looked at her. That happens, Elena said. It doesn't mean you loved her less. Memory isn't. It doesn't keep things the way a photograph does. It keeps the feeling more than the exact details. Is that supposed to make me feel better? I don't know if it's supposed to make you feel anything. It's just true. Maisie thought about this. Okay, she said finally. Then she stood up and went back to wherever she'd come from, with the self-contained completeness of a child who got what she came for. Elena looked at the door for a moment after she left. Then she went back to the mending. The knock came on a Saturday evening, not the front door, the side window. 3 knocks, then a pause, then 2 more, which was the signal they'd worked out with Owen Briggs for anything urgent. Elena was the one who heard it, because Rowan was out at the barn and Nathaniel was in the back room and the girls were already in bed. She opened the side door. Owen Briggs was a plain-faced man in his mid-30s with the kind of steady eyes that suggested he'd made a difficult decision a long time ago and stuck with it. Elena had never spoken to him directly. He looked at her with recognition, not the way Wade Hollow looked at her, not with that proprietary assessment, but with something more like the acknowledgement between people who are on the same side of a dangerous thing. There's a problem, he said quietly. She let him in. Rowan came in from the barn 5 minutes later, saw Owen at the table, and closed the door behind him without a word. Nathaniel appeared from the back. They all sat down. Wade Hollow, Owen told them, had been contacted by Silas Granger. Granger had someone inside the territorial mail system, a clerk apparently, who reported certain categories of mail. The package Owen had sent through for Judge Hartley's clerk had been flagged. Not intercepted, not yet, but flagged. Granger knew that documentation was moving. He didn't know exactly what was in it or who had compiled it, but he knew enough to know that something was wrong. He's moving the timeline, Owen said. The Land Commission meeting. He's trying to push it up. 3 weeks, not 6. The table was quiet. Can he do that? Nathaniel said. He's got 2 commissioners in his pocket, Owen said. He can do whatever he can get 2 people to vote for. 3 weeks. Elena looked at Rowan. He was doing the same mental arithmetic she was. Judge Hartley's schedule, the territorial court calendar, the time needed to put together something that couldn't be dismissed or delayed. The package, Rowan said. Is it still in transit? As of this morning, Owen said. But if Granger's clerk gets access to the routing, how fast can you get a rider to the territorial capital directly? Elena said. Everyone looked at her. Not through the mail system, she said. A person, carrying copies. Making the case in person to Hartley's clerk, or to Hartley himself if he's reachable. She looked at Nathaniel. You know how to talk to people like this. You've been presenting cases to editors and officials for 10 years. You know how to walk into a room and make someone understand why something matters. Nathaniel looked at her. That's 2 days hard writing. I know. And if Wade notices I'm gone, we give him something else to look at, Rowan said. He was already working it out. She could see it happening. I'll go to town, make some noise, stir something, give Wade a reason to focus on me. He paused. It won't be hard. He already wants a reason. That puts you directly in his way, Owen said. Yes, Rowan said. The word landed simply. No drama, just acknowledgement of what it meant and acceptance of it. Elena looked at him across the table. He didn't look back at her right then. He was looking at Owen, working through logistics. But she looked at him anyway, at the set of his jaw and the steadiness in his hands. And she thought about a man who had stood up in a town square and claimed a woman he didn't know on the word of his daughters. And about how that same quality, whatever it was, stubbornness or decency or some combination the two that didn't have a clean name, was now going to put him in the path of men who had already killed for less. She thought about Thomas, who had tried to protect her by keeping her out of it. She thought about how that had worked. She was not going to let someone protect her like that again, not even someone she... She stopped the thought there, filed it away in the place where thoughts went when you couldn't do anything with them yet. Nathaniel rides at dawn, she said. Rowan goes to town day after tomorrow, gives Nathaniel a head start before anything gets stirred up. Owen goes back tonight and does nothing different from what he's been doing. She looked around the table. And we move everything, every copy of every document, out of this house tonight and into 3 separate locations. Because if Granger knows something is moving, we have to assume he might know more than Owen knows he knows. A brief silence. She's right, Rowan said. Nathaniel was already mentally packing. She could see it. Where do the copies go? 1 set stays with Owen, Rowan said. 1 set, he thought. I know a family, out past the Eastern Ridge, 15 miles, the Delacroix family. I helped them through a tough winter 4 years ago. They won't ask questions and they won't talk. He looked at Elena. 3rd set? I keep it, she said. Here, I'm the one with the least reason to be anywhere else. No one argued with that. Owen left the way he came, through the side door, into a night that was clear and cold and full of stars that offered neither comfort nor warning. Nathaniel went to pack. Rowan sat at the table for a moment after the others had gone, his hands flat on the wood, looking at nothing in particular. Elena stayed. She gathered the cups and brought them to the sink and stood there for a moment. You don't have to go to town, she said. Her back was to him. Owen could find another way to, No, Rowan said. He couldn't. A pause. Rowan. Elena. His voice was patient, just that, patient and certain, and not something she was going to move. I'm going to town. I'm going to walk into whatever Wade Hollow has waiting, and I'm going to be fine. He paused. Probably. She turned around. He was almost smiling, in the way that wasn't quite a smile, but was in the neighborhood. That's not reassuring, she said. No, he agreed. It's honest, which I figured you'd prefer. She had nothing to say to that because he was right. She went to her room. She did not sleep for a very long time, and when she finally did, she dreamed of snow, a landscape of it, white and silent and going on forever. And somewhere inside it, 2 small, cold voices calling out into the dark, and a woman making a choice that she did not know would echo for years, in ways she could not have imagined, into a future she could not yet see. She woke before dawn to the sound of Nathaniel's horse moving out of the yard at a walk, then a trot, then the fading beat of hooves going fast into the eastern dark. The house settled into quiet. Elena lay still and counted the days. 3 weeks. It was enough. It had to be enough. She got up and went to start the fire. Rowan rode into Silver Ridge on a Wednesday morning, which was market day, which meant the main street was busy enough that his arrival didn't announce itself the way it would have on a quieter day. He'd thought about that. He'd thought about most of it on the ride in, going through it the way he went through fence lines after a hard winter, methodically looking for the weak points before something else found them first. He had 2 objectives. The first was visible. Buy supplies, be seen, give Wade Hollow something to look at. That wasn't the eastern road toward the territorial capital where Nathaniel was currently riding as fast as a good horse could carry him. The second was less visible. Find out how much Wade knew and how fast things were moving. He tied his horse at the general store and went in and spent 20 minutes buying things he mostly needed and a few things he didn't, talking to the storekeeper about cattle prices and the weather and the particular mundane texture of a man running a working ranch who had nothing on his mind except ranch business. The storekeeper was not an enemy. He was also not a friend. He was the kind of man who would mention casually to whoever asked that Rowan Mercer had been in on Wednesday and bought flour and lamp oil and a new draw knife and seemed perfectly ordinary. That was the point. He was loading the wagon when Cutter appeared. Not Wade. Cutter, the deputy who didn't talk, who had that wide-shouldered stillness that was either discipline or the absence of inner life. Rowan had never been sure which. He came around the corner of the hardware store and positioned himself at the edge of the boardwalk with the practiced casualness of a man who wants you to know he's watching without giving you anything specific to object to. Rowan finished loading the wagon. Then he looked up at Cutter. "Help you with something?" he said. "Just out for a walk," Cutter said. "Fine day for it," Rowan said, and climbed up on the wagon. He felt Cutter's eyes on his back all the way down the street. He did not turn around. He turned at the far end of the block, where the road curved past the feed store and the old livery, and it was there. Out of Cutter's sightline, in the gap between buildings where people moved through without stopping, that Owen Briggs appeared at the side of the wagon, walking fast without looking at Rowan, and said quietly, "He knows about Nathaniel." Rowan kept driving. "How much?" "Enough to know he left. Not enough to know where." Owen matched his pace to the wagon without making it obvious he was doing so. Granger's clerk in the mail system confirmed the package was sent, but couldn't confirm the contents. "Wade's been to the territorial mail office this morning." "The package, already in transit. They can't pull it back without a court order, and Wade doesn't have grounds for one." "Not yet." A pause. "But he's going to move on the house." Rowan's hands tightened on the reins. One movement, controlled. "When?" "Tonight, maybe. Tomorrow at the latest. He's going to say he has information that Elena is harboring criminal materials. He'll come with a search warrant, probably a bad one, but by the time anyone argues about it, the damage is done." Owen glanced at him sideways, still walking. "You need to not be there." "I need to be exactly there," Rowan said. "Rowan, if I'm not there, Elena faces him alone." He said it flat, not dramatic, just the way things were. "That's not happening." Owen was quiet for a moment. "He'll arrest you," he said. "He'll find something to charge you with, even if he has to invent it." "Then he'll arrest me," Rowan said. "But he'll do it in front of witnesses with a warrant he's going to have to justify later, and that's a different thing than what he does to people when there's no one watching." They reached the end of the block. Owen peeled off without a word, already heading back toward the south office. Rowan turned the wagon east. He rode back to the ranch faster than he'd ridden into town. Elena was in the yard when he came through the gate, hanging something on the line, and she read his face the moment she saw it. She left the laundry where it was and met him at the wagon. He told her, all of it, straight, the way she'd told him things from the beginning, without softening and without theater. She was quiet for a moment when he finished, the kind of quiet that was actually thinking, not shock. "Tonight or tomorrow," she said. "Owen's best guess." "The documents are safe, the copies at the Delacroix place. Owen's set." She was going through it in her head. "The set I have here is the problem. If he comes with a search warrant and finds it—" "Where is it?" Rowan said. "Kitchen, under the floorboard behind the stove." She paused. "Which is the first place someone who knows houses will look." They looked at each other. "The barn," Rowan said. "There's a loose board in the feed room, back wall, third one up from the ground. I've been meaning to fix it for 2 years. Inside is about 6 inches of empty space." Elena nodded once. "I'll move it now." "And the recording device." "That too." She moved toward the house. He started unhitching the horse. Then he stopped and said, "Elena." She turned. "If he comes tonight and it goes wrong, if there's any point where you need to take the girls and go, you go. You don't wait for me." He held her gaze. "You take the girls and you ride to the Delacroix place. Margaret Delacroix will keep you there and no questions asked." Elena looked at him for a long moment. "I'm not leaving you alone with him," she said. "Elena, I'm not," she said, with a quietness that was its own kind of finished, and went inside. He stood in the yard for a moment. Then he went to see to the horse. He told the girls that evening, in the simplified and honest way he'd always tried to tell them things that were difficult, that there might be some trouble coming, that they needed to stay upstairs if they heard men at the door, that everything was going to be all right. Clara received this with the expression she used for information she intended to analyze privately. Maisie received it with visible effort at composure that was, in its way, more alarming than if she'd cried. "Is it the bad marshal?" Clara asked. "Might be," Rowan said. "I don't like him," Maisie said. "I know, sweetheart." "What's he going to do?" "Try to make trouble," Rowan said. "But we've been making our own preparations." Clara looked at Elena, who was standing in the kitchen doorway. "Are you scared?" "Yes," Elena said, without hesitation. "Being scared is just your body telling you something matters. It doesn't mean you can't handle it." Clara considered this. "Okay," she said, with the tone of someone filing information. Maisie got up from the table and went to Elena and put her arms around her waist, pressing her forehead against Elena's sternum, without saying anything. Elena put one hand on the back of her head and held her there for a moment. Rowan watched this and felt something pull in his chest that he had no clean language for. "Upstairs," he said gently. "Both of you." They went. Wade Hollow came the next morning. He came at 7, which was deliberate, early enough to catch people before they were fully settled, late enough that there was daylight, and therefore witnesses on the road. He brought Cutter and 2 other deputies Elena didn't recognize, and he brought a paper that he held up as he came through the gate, as though the paper itself was a weapon. Rowan met him in the yard. "Marshal," he said. His voice was easy. Anyone who didn't know him wouldn't have caught the particular stillness underneath it. "Mr. Mercer." Wade looked at the paper in his hand, then at the house. "I have a warrant to search these premises for materials related to an ongoing criminal investigation." "Let me see it," Rowan said. Wade handed it over. Rowan read it. Elena, standing on the porch steps, read his face reading it. Something registered, carefully, with no visible change of expression. "This warrant is signed by Commissioner Aldred," Rowan said. "That's correct." "Commissioner Aldred doesn't have judicial authority to issue search warrants," Rowan said. "That requires a sitting judge. Commissioner Aldred is not a judge. He's an elected county official with administrative authority only." He handed the paper back. "This isn't valid." Wade's expression didn't change in any way that could be specifically identified. But something behind his eyes did the thing Elena had learned to watch for. "Mr. Mercer," he said, with the patience of someone controlling something, "I'd advise you not to complicate this." "I'm not complicating anything. I'm reading the paper you handed me." Rowan looked at him steadily. "You want to search my property? You come back with a signature from a sitting judge. That's the law. You know that. The law as it applies to Miss Ashford's situation is something this office has been quite patient about," Wade said, shifting registers slightly, going for something more conversational. "Given the nature of the accusations she's made against this office, it's natural that we'd want to verify. The accusations she's made," Elena said from the porch steps, "are documented, extensively." Wade looked at her. The look was flat and complete, and it lasted about 2 seconds, which was long enough to communicate everything it was meant to. "Miss Ashford," he said, "I'd encourage you to let the appropriate parties handle this conversation." "I am an appropriate party," she said. "You imprisoned me for 6 months without a valid charge. You tied me to a post in the middle of town. You've come to this property twice now, attempting to intimidate a man who has done nothing illegal." She came down 1 step. "I'm a very appropriate party." Cutter shifted his weight. One of the other deputies glanced at him. Wade was quiet for a moment. Then he said with a change of tone that was the most genuinely frightening thing he'd done yet, "Where is your brother-in-law, Miss Ashford?" The yard went still. "I don't know what you mean," Elena said. "Nathaniel Ashford, reporter, out of Millhaven." Wade said it easily, like a man reading a name off a list. "He's been in this area. I know he came here. I want to know where he is now." "I haven't seen my brother-in-law in 2 years, Elena said. She said it without a flinch. She had known this question was coming, had known it since the moment Owen told them Wade was moving, and she had prepared for it the way she prepared for things, by sitting alone for 30 minutes and deciding exactly what was true and what was not true and where the lines were. She had not seen Nathaniel in 2 years before he arrived. That was true. She didn't know where he was at this moment. That was also true. She knew the general direction and the general purpose, but not his specific location on a specific road at a specific hour. You could say things that were both true and functionally deceptive. Thomas had taught her that, though not intentionally. "He's a newspaper reporter," Rowan said. "They move around. You'd have better luck asking his editor." Wade looked between them. "If materials pertaining to this investigation are found to be in the possession of private individuals," he said, "that becomes a criminal matter for everyone involved." "Then I suppose you'd better get a valid warrant and conduct a legal search," Rowan said. "We'll be here." The 2 men looked at each other. Wade broke first. It wasn't dramatic. He simply turned, indicated to his men with a small movement, and walked back toward the gate. Cutter went. The other 2 went. At the gate, Wade stopped without turning around. "This isn't a situation that resolves itself quietly, Mr. Mercer," he said. "I want you to understand that." "I understand a lot of things," Rowan said. Wade left. The yard was quiet. Elena let out a breath she'd been holding for approximately 4 minutes. "He's going to come back," she said. "Yes," Rowan said. He was already turning toward the house, mind clearly moving ahead. But he needs a real warrant now, and to get a real warrant, he needs a real judge. And the only sitting judge in this county that he can reliably get to quickly is Judge Pratt in the county seat, who is going to take at least 2 days to get a signed warrant back here, Elena said, working it out with him. And Nathaniel is, if he's been riding hard, he's most of the way there already. They looked at each other. 2 days. Maybe less. Maybe more. The margin was thin enough that Elena could feel it in her chest like a physical thing. It was on the second day that everything nearly fell apart. Elena was in the barn, moving through the routine that had become hers over the past weeks, the morning feeding, the water, the particular rhythm of animals that needed the same things at the same times every day, when she heard Clara screaming. Not frightened screaming, furious screaming, which was a different thing, but it still hit Elena's nervous system like a door blown open in a wind. She was out of the barn and across the yard in seconds. What she found, Clara on the porch, with her arms out, physically blocking the doorway, facing a man Elena didn't recognize. Behind Clara, pressed against the doorframe, was Maisie, very white and very still. The man was not a deputy. He was wearing regular clothes, trail dusty, with the look of someone who'd been riding a while. He was not armed that Elena could see, but he had the build of someone who didn't need to be, and he was looking at Clara with the flat irritation of a person who had not expected an obstacle in the shape of an 8-year-old girl. "Move," he said to Clara. "No," Clara said. Elena put herself between the man and the porch in the next 2 seconds. "Who are you?" she said. He looked at her. "I've got a message, for Mercer." "Rowan's not here. He'd ridden to the south fence line that morning to deal with a break that couldn't wait. You can leave it with me, or you can come back. Message is that his cattle buyer from Tanner Creek is at the West Road Junction and won't wait past noon." He looked at her with the expression of a man who has delivered the only thing he came for and wants to be done. "That's it." He turned and walked back toward his horse. Elena stayed where she was until he'd ridden out of the gate. Then she turned around. Clara's arms dropped from the doorway. The furious energy that had been holding her upright went somewhere, and what was left was a small girl who was shaking and trying not to show it. Elena went up the steps and crouched down to her level. "You did exactly right," she said. Clara's jaw was tight. "I didn't know if he was one of the bad ones." "You didn't know, so you stood your ground and bought time," Elena said. "That's exactly right." Maisie appeared from behind the door frame and attached herself to Elena's side without a word. Elena put an arm around her and stayed crouched there on the porch for a moment with both of them. "Is it going to be over soon?" Maisie asked. Her voice was carefully even in the way of children who have learned that expressing the full volume of their fear doesn't help. "I think so," Elena said. "I honestly think so." "But you're not sure," Clara said. "No," Elena said. "I'm not sure." Maisie pressed closer. Clara looked out at the road where the man had gone with an expression that, on a grown woman, would have been called grim determination. Rowan came back at midday, and Elena told him about the cattle buyer message, which turned out to be legitimate, a man he'd had a standing arrangement with who was running early through the territory. He sent a rider with a response and came back into the kitchen and found Elena at the table with a map of the county that Nathaniel had left behind, annotating it with information from memory. "What are you doing?" he said. "Looking at the Land Commission boundary lines," she said. "If Granger gets those transfers ratified, here's what the corridor looks like." She'd marked it in pencil, a connected line running diagonally across 3 counties. "But here's what I don't understand," she pointed. "This parcel here, just west of the Callaway Basin Junction, it's not part of any of the transfers in the documents. But if you're building a water corridor, you need it. It's the connecting piece." Rowan leaned over the map. He was close enough that she could feel the cold still coming off his coat from the morning ride. "The Weston property," he said after a moment. "Who owns it?" "Old woman named Harriet Weston, widow. She's been there 30 years. He stopped. "She's been having trouble with her water access for the past year and a half. I knew that. I brought her firewood last winter because she was struggling." He was very still. "I didn't connect it." "Nobody connected anything," Elena said. "That was the point. None of it looks connected until you're looking at all of it at once." Rowan straightened. "She needs to know." "She needs to know," Elena agreed. "And she needs to know before any commission meeting so that she doesn't—" She paused. If Granger approaches her before the meeting to try to get her to sell quickly, she might take it, Rowan said. She's alone and she's tired and she doesn't know what the land is worth to him. He moved toward the door. I'll go today. Be careful how you frame it, Elena said. If she's been struggling alone, the last thing she needs is… I know how to talk to someone who's been having a hard time, he said, with a brevity that meant something. He looked at her. She looked at him. There was a moment, not long, maybe 4 seconds, where what was between them in that kitchen was not about Wade Hollow or Silas Granger or land commissions or evidence packages and federal judges. It was just two people who had been living in close proximity through something frightening and had, in the process, learned the shape of each other in ways that couldn't be unlearned. Then Rowan picked up his coat and went. The word from Nathaniel came on the evening of the second day. Not from Nathaniel himself. He was still in the territorial capital, doing what he was there to do, but from a writer who arrived with a sealed letter that had been forwarded through a chain of 3 trusted people, which was the system they'd arranged before he left. Elena opened it at the table with Rowan sitting across from her. The letter was short. Nathaniel wrote the way he did everything, with dispatch and no wasted effort. Package received by Hartley's clerk this morning. Judge reviewed summary materials. He is very interested. He is also concerned about the timeline. He has agreed to expedite and will be in Silver Ridge within 5 days. Do not let anything happen before then. And Elena read it twice. Then she set it on the table. Rowan read it. 5 days, he said. 5 days, she said. Neither of them said what they were both thinking, which was that 5 days was both very close and entirely too far, and that the next 5 days were going to require something from both of them that was hard to name. Not courage exactly, because courage implied a choice about fear, and this wasn't really about that anymore. It was about endurance, about holding the line for 5 more days while Wade Hollow moved against them with increasing pressure, and Silas Granger, somewhere in the county seat, calculated what he still had time to destroy. He'll come back, Elena said. Wade, he'll have his warrant by now or close to it. Probably tomorrow, Rowan agreed. And when he comes, we let him search, she said. He won't find anything. The documents are safe. The recording is safe. We give him his legal search and he finds nothing and he has to walk away again. He won't like that. No, she said. He won't. She folded the letter and held it for a moment. I want to be there, she said. When it comes to it, the hearing, whatever Hartley does, whatever form this takes, I want to be in the room. I assumed you would be, Rowan said. I want to speak, she said. Not just as a name on a document. I want to stand up and say what happened. To me, to Thomas, to the Pattersons and the Reyes family, and old John Clure and Harriet Weston and every other person. Granger and Wade Hollow decided didn't matter enough to treat like a human being. She looked at Rowan directly. Is that foolish? He thought about it. Not perfunctorily. Actually thought. No, he said, but it's going to be hard. I know. Standing in front of people who watched you tied to that post. I know, she said again, more quietly. And some of them still won't believe you, even with everything. People don't like being wrong about who they trusted. I know that too. She looked at her hands, at the wrists where the skin had healed to pink scar lines. I'm not doing it to convince everyone. I'm doing it because someone has to say it out loud, in that town, in front of those people. Because if nobody says it, then they get to keep the version of the story where I was the problem. Rowan was quiet. I won't let that be the story, she said. He looked at her for a long moment. All right, he said simply. Outside, the night was settling in, cold and enormous and indifferent to all of it. Inside the ranch house, somewhere above them, one of the girls turned over in her sleep and the house creaked and held. Elena got up and put more wood on the fire and stood there watching it for a moment, watching the small controlled thing that kept the cold at bay, that required tending and attention and never took care of itself. Wade came the next morning with a real warrant. He came the same way, early, with Cutter and 2 deputies, but this time the paper he held up was signed by Judge Pratt, with a proper seal, and it was specific. Materials related to the investigation of the death of Thomas Ashford, including documentary evidence, correspondence, and recording devices. Rowan read it. It was real. He let them in. They searched for 2 hours. Elena stood in the kitchen and watched them go through cabinets and lift floorboards and move furniture, and she kept her hands still at her sides and her face still and let them do the complete and thorough search of a house that contained nothing they were looking for. Wade searched personally. He moved through the kitchen with the focused attention of a man who knew what he was looking for, which told Elena something about how specific his information was. Someone had told him about the documents. Not Owen. She was certain about Owen, as certain as you could be. Someone else. A guess, maybe. An inference. Or someone who had seen something and mentioned it without knowing what they were mentioning. He found nothing. He spent 15 minutes in the barn. Elena could not see him from the kitchen window during that time, and those were the longest 15 minutes she had spent since the early days in the cell, actually, since the days when Thomas had just died and she'd been in that small space, not yet understanding that it was going to last months. He came back empty-handed. He stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at Elena. "Miss Ashford," he said. "Marshall," she said. "This isn't finished." "No," she agreed, "it isn't." He looked at her for a moment with those mismatched eyes. "I gave you the chance to be quiet," he said, low enough that only she could hear. "I want you to remember that." "I remember everything," she said. "That's always been your problem." His jaw tightened just slightly. Then he walked out of the kitchen, through the front door, across the yard, and through the gate, and his deputies filed out after him, and the gate swung shut on the empty road. Rowan appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Barn?" Elena said. "Didn't find it," he said. "Third board, back wall." He looked at the wrong wall. Elena sat down at the kitchen table. She put her head in her hands for just a moment. Not crying, just resetting, just taking 10 seconds to let the sustained pressure of the last 2 hours release before she had to think about the next thing. Rowan sat across from her. He didn't say anything. He was there, and that was its own kind of thing. From upstairs, a door opened. 2 pairs of feet on the stairs, and then Clara appeared in the kitchen doorway with Maisie behind her, both of them still in their nightclothes because they'd been told to stay in their rooms. Clara looked at the kitchen, the moved furniture, the lifted rug, the cabinet doors that hadn't been closed quite right, and then at Rowan and Elena. "Are they gone?" she asked. "Gone," Rowan said. Clara's breath came out in a rush that was entirely too large for an 8-year-old's body. She crossed the kitchen and sat in the chair next to Elena and leaned against her arm with the full weight of someone who has been holding themselves upright for too long. Elena put her arm around her. Maisie pulled out the chair on Elena's other side and sat down with the careful deliberateness of someone doing something that matters. 4 people at a kitchen table, in a house that smelled like moved dust and cold morning air and the remnants of someone else's intrusion, and Rowan looked at Elena over the girls' heads with an expression she couldn't fully read. 4 days, his eyes said. 4 days, hers answered. They sat there for a while, the 4 of them, in the quiet of a house that was still standing. Judge Hartley arrived on a Thursday, 4 days after Nathaniel's letter, which meant he'd moved faster than his stated timeline, and that itself told Elena something about how seriously he'd taken what he'd read. He was not what she expected. She had built a picture in her mind over the past week, the severe, formal architecture of a federal judge, someone with the bearing of an institution. And what stepped off the stage from Mill Haven was a compact man in his late 50s with a travel-worn coat and a gray beard that needed attention, and the kind of eyes that had seen enough that they'd stopped performing anything. He checked into the Silver Ridge Hotel under his own name, which was either confidence or provocation, and sent word through Owen Briggs that he wanted to meet with all relevant parties the following morning. Nathaniel came with him. He appeared at the ranch that evening, thinner than when he'd left, with the wired exhaustion of someone who had been running on urgency for 5 days and wasn't done yet. He hugged Elena in the yard and said, "He's real. He's serious. He read everything twice on the ride here." Then he sat at the kitchen table and ate 2 bowls of whatever was on the stove and told them what had happened in the territorial capital. Judge Hartley had received the package, read Thomas's recorded testimony in transcript form. Nathaniel had written it out by hand, every word, and then asked to hear the recording itself. Nathaniel had played it in the judge's chambers with the door closed and 2 clerks present. When it finished, Hartley had sat for a long moment and then asked a single question. "How long has this marshal been in his position?" 8 years, Nathaniel had told him. Hartley had nodded slowly, with the expression of a man doing mathematics he didn't enjoy. Then he'd said, "Tell me everything else you have," and they'd gone through the documents for 3 hours. "He's convening a formal session tomorrow afternoon," Nathaniel said. "Not a trial. An evidentiary hearing. He has the authority under territorial law to do this without the county court's involvement, and he's exercising it." He looked at Elena. "He wants you there. He wants to hear from you directly." "I'll be there," Elena said. "It's going to be—" Nathaniel paused. "The whole town is going to know about it. Wade will know. Granger will know, if he doesn't already." "Good," Elena said. Nathaniel looked at her for a moment. He had Thomas's eyes, and right now they had Thomas's particular expression, the one that meant he was assessing whether he needed to worry about her and deciding, reluctantly, that she had it handled. "Good," he agreed. Rowan said very little that evening. He ate. He checked on the girls. He went over the fence line notes he'd been keeping, the mundane accounting of the ranch that continued regardless of everything else, because animals needed feeding and fences needed tending, even when the larger world was in the process of deciding something important. Elena watched him do this and understood it, the way some people stayed grounded in the physical and practical when the abstract became too large. She, on the other hand, couldn't sleep. She lay in her room and looked at the ceiling and thought about what she was going to say the next day, not scripting it exactly, but finding the shape of it, the through line. She had been accused of killing her husband. She had spent 6 months in a cell. She had been tied to a post and offered to strangers. She had endured all of it because a system had been carefully constructed to ensure that her voice couldn't reach anyone who would listen. Tomorrow, someone was going to listen. She thought about what mattered most to say. Not for herself, or not only for herself. For the Pattersons. For the Reyes family. For old John Clure and Harriet Weston, and the 3 people whose deaths Thomas had listed in his recording, whose families had been told the deaths were accidents and had carried that incomplete story ever since. She fell asleep thinking about Thomas's voice coming out of that small metal device. She woke up thinking about what she had to do to make sure it mattered. The town hall in Silver Ridge was a single large room that served multiple purposes depending on the occasion: community meetings, civic functions, the rare official proceeding. By the time Elena arrived with Rowan and Nathaniel at 2 in the afternoon, it was more than full. Word had moved through Silver Ridge the way words always moved in small towns: fast, imprecise, electrically charged. People knew a federal judge was holding a hearing. They knew Elena Ashford was involved. Beyond that, the details had frayed into rumor, and rumor had drawn a crowd. Elena walked in and felt the weight of the room's attention land on her like something physical. She recognized faces. The storekeeper who'd watched her tied to the post. The schoolteacher. The blacksmith's wife. People who had stood in the street and done nothing while Wade Hollow auctioned her dignity, and who were now looking at her with a complicated mixture of things: curiosity, guilt, the defensive discomfort of people who were about to be asked to reconsider something they'd preferred not to examine. She looked back at them without flinching. She had made a decision, somewhere in the sleepless hours of last night, about how to be in this room. Not cold. Not performing dignity for people who'd denied it to her. That would have been its own kind of performance. Just present. Just herself. The woman who had given her last blanket to 2 freezing children without thinking twice about it, who had sat in a jail cell for 6 months refusing to confess to something she hadn't done, who had survived not because she was extraordinary, but because she was stubborn, and she understood, at some basic and inarguable level, that the truth existed whether or not anyone was currently acknowledging it. Judge Hartley was already at the front of the room when they came in. He had a table, a chair, and 1 clerk beside him with paper and ink. He was not wearing robes. He was wearing the same coat he'd arrived in, slightly less dusty. He looked at Elena when she walked in and nodded once, not warmly, not coldly, acknowledging. Owen Briggs was there, in his deputy's uniform, standing near the east wall. He met Elena's eyes briefly. That was all? All. Wade Hollow was there too. He was standing near the front, to the left, with Cutter beside him and 2 other deputies in a loose configuration that was technically just standing but arranged with the particular intention of taking up space. He looked at Hartley with the careful expression of a man who had not yet determined how threatened to be. When Elena came in, his gaze moved to her and she felt it the way you feel a change in temperature. Not dramatically, just registered, noted, filed. She found a place to stand near the center. Rowan stood beside her. Nathaniel moved to the table he'd set up at the side of the room, where the documents and the recording device were arranged with the organized precision of someone who'd spent 3 days thinking about the most effective order to present them. Hartley called the room to order. He explained in briefly and without decoration his authority to convene a territorial evidentiary hearing independent of county jurisdiction. He explained that this was not a trial, but that testimony given here was given under the obligation of honesty and would be submitted to the territorial court record. I explained that he had received documentation raising serious questions about the administration of justice in Silver Ridge over a period of years, and that he intended to examine that documentation in the presence of the community it affected. Then he said, "Miss Ashford, please come forward." Elena walked to the front of the room. She stood before 60 people, many of whom had watched her bleed, and she began to speak. She did not start with herself. That was her choice, made in the night, and she kept to it. She started with the Pattersons. She described what Thomas had told her in pieces, over years, about a family that had ranched the Western Ridge for 2 generations until a land company appeared with documents claiming title irregularities. She described the pressure that followed, the visits, the altered paperwork, the settlement that Tom Patterson had signed, not because he believed it was fair, but because he was 60 years old and tired, and the machinery against him was larger than he had resources to fight. She described the Reyes family. She described old John Clure. She described Harriet Weston, who was in the room. She'd come with Rowan's encouragement, a small, fierce woman in her 70s who sat in the 3rd row with her hands folded in her lap and her chin at a specific angle that communicated everything. Then she described Thomas. She described his last months, the late nights, the weight loss, the fear he tried to hide from her because hiding it was his version of protecting her. She described finding him in the kitchen at 3 in the morning burning papers. She described the morning he died and the afternoon Wade Hollow arrived at her door. She described 6 months in a cell and a warrant that Rowan's cousin had subsequently confirmed was procedurally invalid, and a hearing that was not a hearing and a public humiliation that had been designed to ensure that even if she were released, she'd be too broken and too discredited to matter. Her voice stayed even through most of it. It cracked once. At the part about the kitchen, about Thomas burning the papers, about the way he'd looked at her when he noticed she'd seen the file with Granger's name, the look that had been, she now understood, apology. He'd already known, that night, that he might not be able to fix what he'd gotten into. And he'd looked at her with apology and then closed the file and changed the subject, and she had let him, because she'd been trying to give him the space to handle it. She'd let him. Her voice cracked at that, just once, and then steadied. When she finished, the room was quiet in a way that was different from before, heavier and less certain of itself. Hartley looked at her. "Thank you, Miss Ashford." Then he looked at Nathaniel. Nathaniel stood up. He was good at this, better than Elena had given him credit for, watching him now. He moved through the documents with the precision of a man who had organized them, not just logically, but emotionally, building an argument that was also a story. The land titles came first, with the alterations marked in red ink. The financial records came next, showing the chain of money. The witness statements from the Pattersons and Clure. The ledger page with the payments to county officials. Then, last, the letter in Silas Granger's handwriting. The one about the disposal of an inconvenient legal matter. 11 days before Thomas died. Nathaniel read it aloud. Several people in the crowd shifted. The schoolteacher pressed a hand over her mouth. The storekeeper stared at the floor. Then Nathaniel set down the letter and picked up the recording device. Before he died, Nathaniel said, Thomas Ashford made a record. His own voice, his own words. What you're about to hear was made by a man who knew he was in danger and wanted to ensure that the truth had a vessel that couldn't be simply argued away. The room was absolutely still. Nathaniel activated the mechanism. Thomas's voice came out into the Silver Ridge Town Hall like something from another world, and this one at the same time, like a door opened between what had been and what was. And Elena felt Rowan's hand find hers in the crowd, and she held it without looking at him, without moving, just held on while her husband's voice named names and described crimes and said, clearly and without trembling, that his wife was innocent and had always been innocent, and that if she was ever accused of anything related to his death, the accusation was a lie told by men who had decided that the truth was less valuable than their land corridor. The recording finished. The hiss of the mechanism. Silence. Wade Hollow moved. Not dramatically. He stepped forward from where he'd been standing with the expression of a man who has done the calculation and determined that forward is the only direction left. "This is a fabrication," he said, and his voice was controlled but thinner than usual, carrying the specific quality of control that is working very hard. "That recording cannot be verified. The documents, Marshall Hollow." Hartley's voice was quiet. It didn't need to be loud. "You will have an opportunity to respond. That time is not now." Wade stopped, but he didn't step back. And then Owen Briggs stepped away from the east wall. He walked to the front of the room with the deliberate, unhurried pace of a man who has made his decision over a long period of time and is simply completing it now. He stood next to Nathaniel's table and looked at Judge Hartley. "I'd like to make a statement," he said. Hartley looked at him, at the deputy's badge, at the expression on his face. "Go ahead, deputy." Owen Briggs talked for 11 minutes. He described 3 specific occasions on which Marshall Hollow had ordered him to destroy documents related to property disputes. He described a visit he had been ordered to make to old John Clure, in which he was instructed to make clear the consequences of Clure continuing to challenge his land settlement, a visit Owen had made but had not executed as instructed. He described payments he had witnessed being made in the marshal's office to the county clerk by a representative of Granger Holdings. He described the morning Thomas Ashford's body was found, and the speed with which Wade Hollow had mobilized the investigation apparatus against Elena, and how he had known even then that something was wrong but had told himself it was not his place. "It was my place," Owen said. He said it simply, without drama, looking at the floor for just a moment and then looking back up. "It's always been my place. My father's land was worth 4 times what he settled for, and I watched it happen, and I put on this badge and I told myself I was keeping the peace." He looked at Wade Hollow directly. "I wasn't keeping anything. I was just keeping quiet." The room was silent. Wade's hand moved toward his weapon. It was a small movement, maybe even unconscious. But Rowan was watching for it, had been watching for it since they walked in, and he was across the space between them in 3 strides with his hand on Wade's wrist before anything else could happen. "Don't," Rowan said. The word was quiet. The grip on Wade's wrist was not. Wade looked at him. Something crossed his face. Not fear exactly, but the recognition of a man who has run out of the particular kind of room he's been operating in for 8 years. 2 of the other deputies in the room moved toward the door, not toward Wade. That told its own story. Cutter stood for a moment, alone, and then stepped back from Wade with the specific movement of a man removing himself from an association. Hartley spoke. "Marshall Hollow, you will surrender your weapon to Deputy Briggs." The room waited. Wade Hollow looked at Rowan's hand on his wrist. He looked at Owen, who had stepped forward and was now a foot away, waiting. He looked at the room full of people from Silver Ridge who had trusted him, who had let him build what he'd built because trusting him was easier than questioning him. He released the weapon. It took less than 2 hours after that. Not because justice is swift, it almost never is, and Elena knew that, and she didn't deceive herself about it, but because there was enough, finally, and the right person was there to receive it. Hartley moved with the efficiency of a man who had seen enough delayed reckonings to not be interested in delaying this one further. Wade was placed under formal territorial detention, which Owen Briggs administered with the particular expression of a man settling something long owed. 2 of Wade's deputies cooperated immediately. Cutter, in the end, also cooperated, which surprised Elena less than it might have once. Cutter had never been ideological. He'd been employed. The employment was over. Silas Granger was not in Silver Ridge that day. He was in the county seat, which was 40 miles away, and it took until the following morning for the territorial authority to reach him. Elena was not there when they did. She heard about it afterward, that he had been found in his land office, that he had initially attempted to deny knowledge of the documents, and that this attempt had not survived contact with the specificity of what was on record. He was a calculating man. Calculating men, when the calculation no longer works in their favor, sometimes fold more cleanly than passionate ones. The Land Commission meeting was postponed indefinitely. The transfers were frozen. The Patterson family received word within a week that their title was being reviewed by the Territorial Land Office. The Reyes family, and old John Clure, and Harriet Weston, and 4 other families whose paperwork had been quietly distorted over 8 years, all of them received word. Thomas's case was reclassified. The notation in the county record changed from natural causes to under investigation, and then later to something else that Elena didn't read all the way through because she didn't need to. She knew what had happened to Thomas. She had always known. The record confirming it was important, it mattered, she wanted it there. But it didn't tell her anything her heart hadn't already been holding. What she did read, sitting in Rowan's kitchen on a quiet afternoon a week after the hearing, was the single paragraph from Judge Hartley's formal statement regarding her case. He noted that the proceedings against Elena Ashford had been conducted without valid legal authority, that no credible evidence of wrongdoing had been established, and that her imprisonment and public treatment had constituted a serious miscarriage of justice that reflected deliberate abuse of official power. He stated her name clearly, fully, and noted that the record should reflect her complete exoneration. She read it twice. Then she folded it and put it in her coat pocket and sat for a while in the kitchen that had become, without ceremony or declaration, hers. Clara came in looking for something and found Elena sitting there and said, with the directness she applied to most things, "Are you all right?" "Yes," Elena said. "You look like you're thinking very hard." "I am," Elena said. "About what?" Elena considered this. "About how long it takes to know when something is over," she said, "and when something else has started." Clara sat down across from her with the patient willingness of a child who found adults' interior lives genuinely interesting rather than tedious. "When does something else start?" "I think it already did," Elena said. "I just keep waiting for myself to catch up to it." Clara seemed to find this reasonable. "Papa's been like that too," she said, in the conversational tone of someone sharing information with no particular agenda. "He did the fence line yesterday, even though it didn't need doing. Maisie says he does the fence when he can't figure out what he's supposed to be doing instead." Elena looked at her. "Maisie notices things," Clara added helpfully. "She does," Elena agreed. She found Rowan at the east fence line, which did not need attention, as Maisie had accurately assessed. "I was checking a post that was perfectly sound, with the focused expression of a man giving himself something to do with his hands." She came and stood at the fence beside him. He looked at her sideways. "Hartley's statement," she said, holding it up. "I heard," he said. "Owen sent word." "My name is clear," she said. "Formally. In the record." "Yes." She put the paper back in her pocket. They stood at the fence for a moment, looking at the east pasture in the thin winter light, the grass winter brown, the sky the pale blue of this particular time of year, the air cold enough to see your breath, but not cold enough to hurt. "I've been thinking about what comes next," she said. He was quiet, waiting. "Nathaniel wants me to come back to Millhaven," she said. "He thinks I should start over there, new place, clean start." She paused. "He's not wrong. It's a reasonable thing." Rowan looked at the fence post. "Is that what you want?" "No," she said, plainly, without dressing it up. He turned to look at her. "I want to stay," she said. "Not because I don't have anywhere else to go. I want to be clear about that. I could go. I have somewhere to go. I'm choosing this." She held his gaze. "But I need to know if I'm choosing something that's actually being offered." Rowan looked at her for a long moment with the directness she'd learned was his version of being completely honest. "It's being offered," he said. "You're sure?" "I've been sure for a while," he said. "I just didn't think it was the right time to say it, given everything." "It might still not be the right time," she said. "Probably not," he agreed. "But I'm tired of the right time. The right time has been costing us both a lot." She almost smiled. She could feel it at the corner of her mouth, the involuntary thing, and she didn't bother suppressing it. "That's not very romantic." "No," he said. "It's not." He wasn't quite smiling either, but he was in the neighborhood. "I'm not very romantic, I can tell you that up front." "I know," she said. "I've been watching you do account books for 6 weeks." He laughed. It was quiet and brief and entirely genuine, and it was the first time she'd heard him do it fully, without holding part of it back, and it changed his face in a way she filed away without meaning to. "Stay," he said, simply, the way he said most things. "All right," she said. They stood at the fence for another few minutes, not because there was anything to do there, but because neither of them was in a hurry to stop standing there. And the cold air was clean and the pasture was quiet, and somewhere behind them the house stood with smoke coming from the chimney and two girls inside it who were, in their separate ways, waiting to find out what happened next. Elena thought about the night of the blizzard. She thought about it the way she'd been thinking about it more lately. Not as a traumatic memory, but as a fact, a plain and somewhat astonishing fact, that a single night's choice had led here. She had not known those children's names. She had not known their father, or this ranch, or this county's corruptions, or anything that would come after. She had only known that there were two children, and they were cold, and she had a blanket, and the choice was, in the end, not complicated. People made it complicated. They made choices complicated by weighing them against what they'd lose, what they'd cost, what they'd require of you afterward. And sometimes those calculations were right and necessary, but sometimes the moment was simpler than the calculation, and you had to be willing to recognize which was which. She had been willing that night. It had cost her nearly everything and given her everything else. She was not going to say that out loud, because it would sound like the kind of thing that tied a bow on suffering, and she knew better than that. Suffering doesn't get a bow. It gets survived and carried and gradually metabolized into something you can live alongside. What she'd been through was not redeemed by what came after. It was just, also true, alongside the rest. Both things could be true at once. That was something she understood now that she hadn't understood before, or hadn't understood fully. That you could be broken and also building. That a person could be a survivor of something terrible and also, at the same time, someone in the early stages of being happy. That the two states were not in competition. Clara was on the porch when they came back, sitting on the step with her reader, her breath making small clouds in the cold air. She looked up when she heard them coming across the yard. "Did you talk?" she asked, with the precision of a child who knew exactly what she was asking. "We talked," Elena said. "And?" "And Elena's staying," Rowan said. Clara's expression did not do the dramatic thing that might have been expected. She did not whoop or cry or throw her arms around anyone. She just looked at Elena with the particular steady look she had, the one that was older than 8, that had been old since before Elena met her, and said, "Good. Maisie will be glad." "Will she?" Elena said. "She'll pretend she already knew," Clara said, turning back to her reader. "But she'll be glad." Maisie did pretend she already knew. She received the information at dinner that evening with a nod and returned to her food, and then about 20 minutes later, quietly and without announcement, moved her chair approximately 4 inches closer to Elena's. Nobody commented on this. Nathaniel left 2 days later, back to Millhaven, back to his newspaper and the story he was already writing, carefully, with documentation, with the specific care of a man who understood that printing it wrong would cost more than printing it slowly. He held Elena for a long moment before he mounted up. "Thomas would have," he started. "I know," she said. "He would have liked him," Nathaniel said, glancing at Rowan, who was giving them space by pretending to adjust something on the barn door. "I know that too," Elena said. Nathaniel looked at her for a moment with Thomas's eyes. Then he nodded and rode. She watched him go until he was small on the road, and then he was gone. And the road was empty. And Silver Ridge was behind all of it, not gone. It was never going to be fully gone. You don't leave 6 months of that behind like a coat, but behind her. In the place where things go when you've moved through them and they've moved through you, and what's left is just the shape you've become. She turned back to the yard. Rowan was still at the barn door, no longer pretending to adjust anything. He looked at her across the distance of the yard. She walked toward him, not because he was waiting, though he was, but because the barn was where she'd been headed, because the afternoon feeding needed doing, because this was a working ranch, and there were animals that needed her. And that was the plainest and most honest thing about the life she'd chosen, that it needed doing every day, and she was glad to be the one doing it. That winter, Silver Ridge changed. Not all at once. Not the way stories want to tell it, with a clean line between the before and the after. It changed the way places actually change, incrementally, grudgingly, with some people faster than others, and some people who never fully got there. The storekeeper stopped averting his eyes when Elena came to town. The schoolteacher came to the ranch one afternoon and sat at the kitchen table and said, with the difficulty of someone who had rehearsed this and found the rehearsal insufficient, that she was sorry she hadn't done more. Elena gave her coffee and said the only honest thing she had, which was that she didn't know what more would have looked like in that moment, and that doing more was a lesson for the next time, not a weight to carry about this one. The families with returned land came back to the ridge and the basin one by one, in the way families come back to things they never fully left, with a combination of relief and practicality and the knowledge that some seasons were lost and couldn't be recovered, and the next season needed planting anyway. Harriet Weston's water access was restored. She sent Elena a jar of preserved plums with a note that said, "Only thank you," which Elena read and then put on the windowsill because it was the right place for it. Owen Briggs became acting marshal while the territory sorted out what came next. He did it with the same quiet steadiness he'd apparently been storing up for 2 years, waiting to be useful. Rowan and Elena married in the spring under the cottonwood trees by the creek, with Clara as the main logistical coordinator of the event. She had opinions about the arrangement of everything, and Maisie as the person who made sure Clara didn't over-coordinate. Nathaniel rode down from Mill Haven and stood next to Elena and cried openly, which he did not attempt to disguise, because he was that kind of person. Rowan's cousin came, the Delacroix family came, Harriet Weston came and brought more preserved plums. It was not a large ceremony. It was not a perfect one. The weather was uncooperative, and Clara argued with Nathaniel about the placement of chairs for 20 minutes, and Maisie at one point sat down on the ground and refused to get up until someone acknowledged that the whole morning had been too much. Someone, Elena, acknowledged that. Maisie got up. What it was real. Years passed the way years do, not triumphantly, not in a montage of golden light, but in the ordinary accumulation of seasons. The ranch grew. Not spectacularly. Enough. 2 more children came, a boy named Thomas, which was Rowan's suggestion, offered quietly one evening and accepted without much discussion because some things don't require it, and a girl the twins named Margaret before anyone else got a vote, which was fair. The house expanded to accommodate the accumulating evidence of people living fully in it. Clara grew up to be someone who argued cases in the territorial court with the same chin-raised certainty she'd displayed at 8 years old on a porch step, facing down a stranger. Maisie grew up to be a surveyor. She had inherited Elena's eye for maps and her particular attention to how the land was shaped, what it connected, what it divided. She mapped the water corridor that Granger had been assembling, noted it in the territorial land record, and ensured that no single entity could acquire that kind of control again without extensive public review. Elena did not think about the blizzard every day. Some winters went by without her thinking about it much at all, because her life was full of present things, and the past requires less attention when the present is sufficient. But some years when the snow came early and the wind came down off the ridge and covered the valley in that particular white silence that meant the world had gone interior, she'd stand at the kitchen window and look at the cottonwood trees by the creek and find herself back in that night. The cold, the wind, the weight of 2 small bodies leaning against her. The decision to stay that had not felt like a decision at all. She never thought of it as brave. That was the truth of it. She'd been cold and tired, and she'd come across 2 freezing children, and she'd done the only thing she could live with doing. It hadn't been about courage. It had been about who she was at the most fundamental level, before the calculations started, before the weighing of costs and the assessing of risk. Who are you at that level? What do you do when there is no audience and no reward and no assurance that it will turn out all right? That question, she had come to believe, was the one that actually mattered. Not who you were when things were easy, not who you were when people were watching, who you were when it was cold and dark and no one would have known the difference. She had known the difference. That had been enough. She turned from the window when she heard the boots on the stairs, Rowan's, heavy and familiar, coming down from wherever he'd been. And she turned to the stove and checked what was on it, because it needed checking, and the kitchen was warm, and through the ceiling she could hear some sort of argument developing between voices she loved, and the snow was on the valley again outside, and the life she had not planned and could not have imagined was entirely, imperfectly, sufficiently hers.